This presentation is the AMNet overview session. It is a little bit more geared towards users who maybe have not been in the system for too long. And it will be more about just pointing out the areas and things that are in the system. You know, I have had users that have used the system for a very long time, and I point out an area that we think is something that you should know, and people go, oh, I never realized that was there. So I also, because of we have so much to just point out where things are in the system in a limited time, especially because we started a little late, I'm not going to be going into depth into what I'm going to be showing in general. It's just pointing out what is here in the system to use. Can you close one of the doors? Thanks. So first, and Phil and Larry have mentioned a couple of areas that I'm going to point out also. First, I just want to mention about user rights in the system and roles, which Larry had mentioned. You know, everyone does have to have user rights set up in the system. And he did already talk about having roles set up in the system. So everyone has a user account. And in those user accounts, you can have certain things set up. Now, of course, you have to have rights to get in here to work with those. And rights are given to people within here. And we do suggest, if you have not switched over to roles, as Larry said before, that you do that. It's a good idea to be using roles for your assignments. If you still are using the old roles that are based off of the users, it's a good idea to transition to the more job-specific based roles that Larry had spoken about earlier. There are also system preferences in here. Now, this is an area that your database administrator usually will be setting up when you start using AM.NET. And they normally do not have to be changed as you're using AM.NET. But as we add new features into the system, we may also be adding new system preferences that should be reviewed when they're added in. But these types of things are controlling wide areas of the system. For some are very narrow. You have areas here like, what is your dues year? That has to be changed every year. That's not consistent. But some of these other settings, you change them once, and they're always there. Another area that you may come into more frequently, or after you've started using the system, is setting fields to be text fields or HTML fields. There are a few in events, mainly on the marketing tab, also in products, and there's a smidgering, I think, like the leader bio field is another, and there's one in committees, I believe, where you can change it to either a text field or an HTML field, and the setting of that is here in System Preferences. So both of those areas are ones that most users do not have any control over. Your database administrator, maybe together with your managers, have decided what these settings are going to be and how the system is going to work for you. The one area, though, that you as an individual user get to have control over, some things in the system, are your user preferences, which are here under the File menu. So these, again, are specific to you as a user, and you can set them however you want. Here you can control in the Names, Firms, and Events module what you want to be the default tab. Your Name tab or your Summary tab. Which one do you use more frequently? So you want it to be the default tab that opens for that module. There are two tabs here for your search. What default settings do you want for your search? One for the standard search and one for the incremental search. You can set what is your default search value. You also can set whether you want the standard or the incremental to be your default search that opens. Some email options here. Basically, what is your email address that you want to be used when you're sending out email reports from the system. Here in the data entry defaults are some settings for you, again, as a user for certain routines in the system. One that a lot of people may use is saving selection criteria or exporting of fields. You can set your default security setting. What is the setting you normally use when you're saving those? You can set a default. The newest one we added is here for AP voucher requests for some filters. Promotions, which Larry at the end of this session is going to be coming up and doing an overview of the promotions module. And here in user preferences, you can set some coloring options for the promotion calendar, as well as having a setting for filters. And you also, as a user, have a place where you can change your password within AM.net. Okay, the next thing I want to talk about is areas that kind of work throughout the entire system. There are grids that, of course, are found throughout in file maintenance and routines in the system, as well as in file maintenance, the toolbar. So first I want to go through the file maintenance toolbar. Many of these buttons in the file maintenance toolbar are found in all of the modules. Those being those for navigation, your searching, your incremental search, your standard search, adding a new record, saving, undo, which is going to revert any changes made by the current user, deleting a record. This is refresh, which does the same thing as undo, but it also refreshes the data from the database, and the exit. So those are found in all file maintenance toolbars. Some of the buttons are only found in certain modules. The first one I want to look at is only found in names, firms, events, and committees. And that is the address function button. It works a little bit different in each module, so I'm going to take a quick look at each of those, but the basis is the same throughout. It brings in for you to copy and paste, whether out to some other application or to use in a label or envelope, the name and address from the record, but down here in the drop-down you can select which address on this record you want to work with. And this is the same also in firms. You get to select the address to work with. You also can pick if you want the street or mailing address information to be shown. And also from here, you can send an email. It'll open up your email application and put the email address in the to. If there's no email address on the record, then that listing would be disabled. In firms, it's very similar. The address information here, your labels, envelopes, go to your clipboard, pick your address. Do you want the street or mailing address, and the send email. In events, it's a little bit different. Here, of course, you don't have a name and address, but you have some information from the event that comes in that you can copy. And for emails, you have 3 different radio buttons at the bottom for which emails do you want to work with to go into an email message. Do you want to work with emails coming from registrants? Do you want to work with those coming from leaders on the event or exhibitors on the event? So you first pick the radio button and then send email, and all of those will go into the to field. In committees, the only function it has is to send the emails. It works off of the member tab of what is displayed, and I need to change my date to get something displayed in this database. So whatever records are displayed on the members grid for the date that's above it, which I just changed, or who it's going to email. Of course, they have to have an email address. So all of those addresses will go into your mail message. Back in names, a couple of other icons that are specific. The photo icon is specific only to names. You can attach, it doesn't have to be a photo, we just called it photos, because I believe originally it was for like leader photos possibly, but it can be any image file. It can be saved here on the name record. And you can just use the drop down here, add, edit, or view. the image that's attached to the record. There was one, let me just catch up. There was one other icon, and we're going to talk about it later in detail that I didn't mention that is in all of the file maintenance toolbars, and that's the favorites, and we're going to talk more about that later. In both names and firms, there is also the shopping cart icon, and we are also going to talk more in depth about that later. There are also keyboard shortcuts if you're a keyboarder instead of a mouser. Anywhere throughout the system, you will, I am not a keyboarder. When you see an underscore under a letter, if you look up here in the top menu, you'll see there's some underscores. You'll see it throughout the system. So if I open this name record here, under the routines drop-down menu, of course, if I'm a mouser, I can open up the routines drop-down menu. But if you want to use one of the shortcuts with the keyboard, you use your Alt key and that underscored letter, which is the shortcut keyboard, and then that will open up that action. If you look in that list, the listings also have shortcut keys on them. So if I wanted to do, let's say, I'm going to do dues payment. I'm going to start again. I'm going to go Alt-R to bring up that, keeping the Alt key down, and then do, was it, I'm sorry, I forgot, was it U or D? Dude, sorry. It's so tiny on here, it's very hard for me to see. And then it launches the routine. And as I said, that's throughout the system. Even here you can see on the OK and cancel buttons, there are shortcut markings everywhere throughout the system. Now to talk about grids. Grids you'll find throughout the system in file maintenance as well as in routines. And there are some functions within the grid where you can change how you can see the information in the grid. In most places, I believe everywhere in file maintenance, in many of the routines where we have it, those changes that you make will be saved. So the next time you come back in, you'll see the changes that you made in the grid. So some of those, just to show you an example of that, every grid we have a default setting of how we decided to set the sort order. Just a second. I will go over here. So let's say I wanted to have, for some reason, the status closer over here by the name. You're going to always be working with the header row in the grid, and you just drag it over to the placement that you want it to be in. You also can sort, so you can move the columns. You can sort the columns just by clicking on the header, and then we'll resort. Click it again, goes between ascending and descending sort. You also can have a secondary or third or fourth sort, meaning first sort on this field, second sort on this field. You do that by clicking the shift and then clicking the next header of where you want the second or third or fourth sort to be on. See, it's always, like I say, there's always some little thing we think, oh, everyone knows this. Yes, I'm getting there. Okay, so as Phil just mentioned, the last thing, so let's say you've moved it, and you can move that as much as you want. So if I close this file maintenance window and reopen it, it's going to have those settings there. Now if I say, oh, I really didn't want it this way, I shouldn't have done that. All you have to do is reset. Mouse anywhere in the grid, open up your context menu, and you'll see reset columns. Thank you. And then when I click that, it goes back to what our default in the program is for that grid. Next thing is hot links. And hot links are for, from a grid, entering opening up a file maintenance window. And you can tell that a field is set as a hot link because when you put your mouse over it, you get the little pointer finger. And that is done. It's going to vary which grids we have that on and which fields we've done it on, but mainly it's in more key fields, names ID, the name, firm ID, the firm, event year, event code, here just event name. Like I said, if you're not sure, you can see here, because I'm on the name field, so the little mouse pointer is a little finger pointing. So if I double click, it's going to open up that file maintenance record. And again, that's throughout the grids in the system. If you see an area where, oh, it would be really nice in this grid if we had that on this particular field, and again, usually kind of those key data fields, let us know. It's an easy thing to add in. You also have in the grid links on email addresses. Let me go back into events. Anywhere in a grid that you have an email address displayed, you're going to see it shown as a link, and that's usually in the blue color of the underline. Again, the mouse pointer will change to a pointed finger when you hover over it. And because it's an email, this, of course, is not opening up a record in the system. It's going to, again, open up your mail application with this email address in the to field. Yeah. There's also grids, in many of the grids in the system, there's a parent-child relationship. Sometimes, as in names on the dues or events, that is more of your ledger to your general. Basically, your parent is your summary row, and your child rows, let me open one up here, are your detail about that parent or summary row. So in events, the parent row is the registration, the child rows are the transactions for that registration. Same thing in dues. In dues, the parent row, you get one for each dues year, but it's the ledger information, the summary information for that dues year, and the child rows are, again, the journal transactions related to that dues year. You can also have multiple child products is one that has multiple child information to it. So it's not just journal transactions. You have line item from the order, you have payments, and the invoice as a whole. Sometimes also, the child may not be some type of transaction like that, as in voucher request. The child might relate that to show you that there's a document. So the child here, this is a document that's attached to this voucher request, and it's there and you can view it. Last thing on grids is context menus. We kind of took a look at earlier. Then most grids also have context menus that have functionality that you can do within them. Next, I'm going to look at, I talked about a little bit about having some fields and system preferences that can be set as plain text or HTML. And for events, mainly those are found on the Marketing tab. The way that a general user can tell whether it's set as plain text or HTML is by seeing if there's this HTML editor toolbar at top that tells you that this field is set for HTML. Within that toolbar, you can do things like adding a table, adding in links, HTML or email hyperlinks. You can bring in an image, you can do spell check, your basic bolding and all that kind of stuff also. Also be aware of the 3 buttons down here at the bottom. The first one to the left is your WYSIWYG design mode. You can do edits in this mode. The next one here is your HTML edit mode. So you get the raw HTML here. Again, you can edit within this mode. And then you get a preview mode. What is this going to look like when it's displayed? So here we talked a little bit about linked text throughout the system. We also have what we call link fields. Those are fields that will let you link out to another file maintenance record. And there are several here on this events data tab. Staff contact links out to a name record. Administrators also link out to name records, and vendors link out to firm records that are set up as a vendor. You'll find those types of fields throughout the system also. Last little bit in here is there are a couple of fields. First one I'll look at in names, where you can have set up in the system encrypted data, and we have a little button. If it's set up, you need to let us know so we can set this button up for you to decrypt the data for you. And all that's controlled by security rights also. So here in names, sorry, I must be on the wrong person. So Social Security number. Now I know a lot of states don't track this number anymore, but I'm just showing you this. When we go into firms, you'll see one that makes more sense. So this data is encrypted in the database. But if you need to actually see what that data is, then you can click this little decrypt button that's next to it, and then that will show you what the data is, and you can make the edits there. Again, all controlled by security rights. Right, he's saying usually it's only stored for the 1099 purposes, Social Security numbers. Which ties into where I'm going next is in firms, on the Accounts Payable tab, we have Tax ID, which functions in the same way. Be encrypted. Again, you have the little decrypt button here, so you can view what it is and make edits. In place add edit buttons in file maintenance. The system is made up of about 200 tables. When you're in names, of course, all the data that you're seeing in names is not coming from just the one names table in the database, between all of those tabs and all those fields that we show you. It's pulling from many, many different tables in the database. Those tabs, which in here I believe are the name, data history, list, and UDF, and a smattering of fields and some other tabs, are what live in the names table. Thus, they don't have one of those in-place add edit buttons at the bottom. When you're on another tab that's pulling the data from another table, so names, a table other than names, and firms, a table other than firms, then you're going to see those in-place add edit buttons. So when I go to dues, there are in-place add edit buttons down here to work with. That's why these are disabled. They don't live on the parent table. Same thing here in events. You to be able to get into this information, which are in some of the event tables, you need to use the in-place add edit buttons in the lower left. All right, the next area I want to look at are all the different searches. Now, you have the basic, standard, and incremental search and file maintenance. But beyond that, there are 7 other different ways to search data up here under the File menu. You can click on any of them, and you'll see in the screen that opens up, there's tabs at the bottom, so you can get to any of those search screens. So you just click any of them, and it'll open the screen up. So the first one I want to look at is email search. Here you can, if you know the entire email address, you can type it in, File, drop down. Then click Display. And it'll show any of the records that have that email address on them. Now, maybe you don't know the whole address. Maybe all that you know, or you want to look for all records that are linked to a certain domain. You can do that and just look for the domain portion and check the box below to search. And then when I click, I'm going to get all the records back that have that domain in their email address. Phone fax search works very similar. Here you do have to know the entire number. It'll bring back records that have that in the phone or fax field. Credit card search. There's different ways to search because different societies, and over time we've stored credit card information differently. So you can, first you need to pick the radio button. If you can't still, search by the full credit card number. If anyone's still doing that and storing it all, you can. Most likely you're going to be searching by the last 4 digits of the credit card number. Oops. Or, and I don't know why it's not returning, but I'm not going to wait on that. Or you can, let me try one more. No. Or you can search by the reference number. Okay. And again, it just brings transactions that have used that credit card. And you also down here, when you bring a print information if you'd like to. And in the upper right, you were able to do it by date range. Then we have checks paid to society, those that are coming into the society. I don't know why, sorry. I've checked these before and I don't know why they're not showing up. But again, it's just going to bring back into the grid information on the check that it found. Sorry, it's not bringing it up. And you also can click on the voucher number here and open up, if it's, sorry, the next one for if it related to a voucher. The next one is check number search, which is the society cutting a check. And here you can click on the voucher number. Let's get to the last one here, the social media. We have social media fields and names and in firms. So you can search, again, just like the email, search for records that have that information in it. Here it's matching like in the incremental search, and it's bolding what matched if I keep typing. I must have mistyped. It will narrow down who you're looking at. The last one is the product customer search. You can search either by order number or invoice number. And then it'll open either the names or file maintenance record where that product sale is located. So those are all the additional searches that you can do. And again, those were gotten to just by going under the file and picking any one of the listings here. Next, I want to look at the email domain update. It's under Utilities, Routines, Supervisor Functions, because very few people should be doing this process in the system. Email domain update. I have some tests. We'll see if it comes up. So I have some test records in here that have a domain of email.com. But you could just put in whatever the domain is that you're looking for. Maybe a firm has changed, including their domain, because they've changed the firm name. So they've changed the domain of all their emails, and you need to change all of them together. You know, it could be simple like this, it's just a few records, which you could do yourself if you wanted to, but you might have 100 records. So once you get the records up here, we default to having them all checked, that we were going to change the domain. But you can uncheck someone if you're like, no, I don't want to change that person's email. Then over here, you just type in what the new, I'm just going to type new.com, what the new domain is. You click OK, and it changes the domain portion of the email on all of those records that are checked. Okay, now we're going to talk about favorites. So I mentioned that in the file maintenance toolbar, but it's not limited just to file maintenance. That's the little yellow star right there. This is found, relates to file maintenance, dashboards, reports, as well as routines in the system. Favorites is kind of a shortcut way to be able to launch something. I hear all the time on reports and routines, now where do you launch that from? I don't remember, someone showed me. If you set something as a favorite, you don't have to remember how to get to it. Or let's say you're working with a conference for the next 3 months, getting ready for that, and you're always going to be going back to that same event record over and over and over. Or you're working with a firm on some kind of project for something, and you know you're going to be working on the record a lot. You don't want to have to always remember, what was that ID number, and open it up. You can set all these things as favorites. And in file maintenance, the way to set a favorite is just to click that little star. So when it's grayed, it's not set as a favorite. You click it, and when it's, click it, and when it's yellow, then it is set as a favorite. So that's in file maintenance where you set it. If it's going to be a report that you're going to set, or a routine, they're both done out of their dashboards. It's the reports dashboard. Routine dashboard looks very similar. It's the little stars right here next to the listings on the left side. And in the dashboards, I don't have those loaded on here, but again, on the tiles, there's a little star for the favorites. So once you set your items as favorites, then you come up to the top favorites bar, drop-down menu, and you can have, I don't have any dashboards on mine, but I do have some records, which are file maintenance records. Now I only see the modules that are listed for where I have favorites set up. Bring your cursor over, and now these are the firms that I have set up as favorites. If I click on this one, it's going to open that file maintenance record. Same thing with reports. What reports do I have set up? Okay, it's going to open up confirmations so I can run it. So that's just another shortcut way. Now, of course, Phil has jumped on this because he's now doing automations. So with many reports, you may not be having to run anymore, but those are still there maybe for more internal reports that you're running. All right, the next area is document management. Larry mentioned briefly, about document management. You can save files to records, file maintenance records in the system. Let me, I'm just going to point you for this one item to the online documentation, because I can't go through and talk about all the different places that you can, but these are all the places where you can add a document in the system. You can tell within file maintenance here, because you see the little piece of paper icon on the tab, you also might see them in a grid. There's that little piece of paper icon or page icon that lets you know that document management can work here for this class. If the record actually has some documents on it in that area, then that little check mark, and I wasn't sure if I had someone here that had it, would have a little green check mark on it. Oh, I know it. No, I just went to the wrong record. So here on this name tab, it has a little green circle with a check mark in it. That means there are actually documents attached. Larry also did mention that there are two related routines to document management. The first, and they're both found in Utilities, Routines, Supervisor Functions. The first one is for retention, document management policy. That's for retention. So this is going to list, and it's done by the document type. There's classes, and you get to set up the types for each of those classes. So your retention policy is done by the type. So this is going to list, I mean, if you don't see anything in this grid, it's because you don't have any document types set up, which is why Larry was saying you need to get those set up to be able to work with this. So this has a list of all the different document types that I have in my system. Then you get to set the last two columns here. What is the max size of a document that can be saved for that type? And also, what is your retention policy time frame for that? And as you can see, we've got years. We've also got years done off the fiscal year. And there's also a listing for permanent, which will tie into the next routine we're going to look at, meaning we don't ever want to get rid of this document. We need to keep it forever. When you put a date range or time frame on it, that's more like at a certain point we can get rid of this document out of the system. So that's where you set it up. Once you have those set up, and then you are adding in documents and you select a type, there are retention fields on that screen, and this data will default in. So the other one is the delete or destroy documents. Another one that only a select few people should have rights to run. And again, this runs off of the type. So if I change, that's all, because I have no type selected here, so that's all that I have in the committee class. But if I select a type, then it'll narrow it down to those with just that type. And they're being pulled in here because the end retention date on these documents has passed. So they're available, or you have said it's okay, you can delete or destroy these now. And again, this is all controlled by user rights of who can do this. So that you can either delete, and again, you have check boxes. You could uncheck one if you wanted to. We've talked about parent-child relationships. You can view the records from here. So then you can delete or destroy all of those that are checked here. Just a quick note, because Larry did already mention earlier about MOA, that in names MOA, just to see the balance that they have, is right here on the Event tab. And in Firms, it's on the Name tab. But each society should have some policies on whether you're going to use MOA and when you're going to use it. So yes or no, are you ever going to use it? And if you are, in what circumstances do you want to use MOA? There are also a few MOA-related reports that I'll just point you where they're at. Events, reports. It's like hesitating, sorry. I've clicked about 5 times now. Money on account. Events, reports, money on account. There's a credit memo, which is a customized format for sending out to let people know you have an MOA balance. There's an error report and some transaction reports. All right, shopping cart. I mentioned earlier when we talked about the file maintenance toolbar. In names and in firms, you have access to the shopping cart up here in the file maintenance toolbar. Shopping cart is for credit card payments. It's the place where you can do one credit card payment cross-module. Our system is modularized, and everywhere else you have a separate payment routine for the specific module. So if you had to do an event payment and a dues payment for the person, you had to go 2 places and you got 2 payments going through. If you have a credit card payment, you can do them through the shopping cart into one payment cross-module. So when I launch it for this name record, lower left is going to show me existing balances in the different modules. And then on the right, it uses the Apply To buttons that are also used in the cash batch. They have the same options there if you're used to working with that routine. So I can apply for this person in dues, events, products, miscellaneous cash. I can do any of the areas that I want to do. I can do as many. I can have 1 thing paid, 5 things paid. It doesn't matter. When we launch it from firms, you not only can work with payments to the firm itself, but you also can do payments to any of the employees on the firm. So I might do, maybe the firm itself had a product sale, but then they're also going to pay dues for some of their employees. And maybe some of those employees are also going to have registrations they're going to pay for. You can do all that together in one credit card payment. So here, launch the shopping cart. Again, balances down here. We have a few more columns here. There's the modules. This firm, balances for this firm that we launched it from. Also branches to this firm. And this actually, the payment applied populates as you add records into the grid here. And again, just like in cash, you get a few more options here on the Apply To buttons because you are working with employees. You get the group dues payment, group event payment. So you have more options for how you can apply the money. I want to briefly talk about system calendar exceptions. This is something that if you want to utilize, get in touch with Phil. It ties in with automated, he always perks up when I say his name, automated email communications that would go out. This is where you can, I'm in utilities, routines, supervisor functions. That's sounding familiar, hopefully, to people where I've been going. I don't know why, sorry. Again, I'm clicking on reports and it's not doing anything.
The bottom, you already have it open. The last one is
Thank you. Thank you. I usually don't leave them open. So here's system calendar exceptions. This is for tracking non-business days. So Monday through Friday, a regular business day that you're going to be closed. 4th of July, Christmas, those types of days that you're closed. So as I said, we can tie this into the automated emails that Phil spoke about earlier today. And if you want to have one of those emails sent out X number of business days before something, then he can tie into what you have set up here in the calendar to know what are your business days. Because if you don't set that up here, you want business days, it's going to count Christmas and 4th of July. Okay? But you do, it's not an automatic. Just setting them up there is not going to tie into what he's doing in the automation. You need to let him know to work with that.
Interject there, that those holidays or special days you put in there as non-business days will also transfer into the data warehouse. So in the data warehouse, I actually have a dates table that just keeps track of dates and where they fall on whose year,
Jeff?
mid-year. Oh yeah.
Sorry.
No, you're right. I'll be recording later.
Yes.
So in the data warehouse, I'm pulling in those same exceptions into a dates table, and the dates table in the data warehouse just keeps track of every date to make sure of what event year it's in, what dues year it's in, what calendar year it's in, and all of that. And it has a date type, and typically it's either weekday or weekend, but it also has holiday as an option. And so if you add to this calendar, it's transferred into the data warehouse and counted as a holiday. And actually in the data warehouse dates table, national holidays are already accounted for, so you don't have to worry about Christmas or Thanksgiving. Anything that's a national holiday is already called a holiday and not treated as a business day. But if it's not a national one, you can add it here.
Thank you.
So hold on.
There was this, believe in response to a question earlier today, Larry briefly mentioned about the Aristotle subscriptions, and I just wanted to point out in system preferences a couple of things that relate to that. The first two relate to the address verification and the adding the 9-digit zip that he spoke about. You can see here the last date that was processed on your system, and here also the dates between a complete rerun of all your addresses. Normally it's done every day, an incremental check on addresses. But how often do you want all of your records checked for their addresses is set here. The other three relate to just notifications that are going to go out. If you want to have a staff person be notified when a process in here is done, you can put those in here. Okay, I think the last, I'm going to kind of cut one or two things because we started late, is talk about the save report output. In the reports dashboard, any listing that you see that has to the right of it, the show history is a report, and it will be those that you can do a print output for. If you see the show history, that means that you can use the save report output functionality in the system. This is basically something, it's very underused, we feel, by people at societies, to help with your paperless office, also to get rid of having to file things away. You can take a report that you've run and just save it within the system. You don't need to print it out and put it in a filing cabinet. And it also helps if someone is going to come by and ask you, oh, well, I need to see that report that you run every month that has this information. If you save it in here, anyone can go in and access it. Again, everything's by rights, but they can go in and they can view it through the system. They don't have to ask you for the one that you printed out. So when you run a report where this functionality is there, you'll see on the left-hand side of the wizard an option when it comes up. You'll have an option here to save the report. Yeah, and I've done it several times since I've been here, and it's not been that slow. So here, save report output. You get a chance to add a note if you want to have a note saved with this report as you're saving it. It can be whatever information you want it to be. You don't have to add a note if you don't want to. So now I saved that, but I've run it a couple of times earlier. If I go and click Show History across from that report, it's going to open up the screen where I can access not only for that report, but actually for any report that you can do this on by navigating up here. I can get to any of them. You can do some filters here, looking at the outputs by date ranges, by users who ran them. But the grid is showing you all those saved instances of the report. And you can view the report. So like I said, anyone who has access to come in here can look that up and see it. You can use it for, what did you call that, Larry? No, for auditors, a point in time type of thing. Yes. Why don't you talk a little bit more about that? Hold it and just keep talking.
Practice, hello?
Yeah.
I think in practice, accounting seems to be the department that does the most printing of reports. And a lot of, if you're taking reports and just putting them in a file cabinet to be able to refer to in the future or to have for the auditors, then this might be a good alternative to go paperless, because you can save a permanent version of the report in the database. It's also useful for point-in-time reports like a profile report. If you run a profile report at the end of every month, with certain settings, you can save those and then have a month-by-month history of your profile.
Okay, so that wraps up my portion, but now Larry's going to come up and he's going to talk about promotions.
I think actually we're kind of running late, and it's going to take me a few minutes to set up the laptop. So
We're going to skip that?
I guess we're going to skip that, and then we'll take a break and then pick up in the idea exchanges around 10 after 3. This middle section here will be the CPE users groups, since that has the most people participating. We'll do the
I think finance is down at the
finances
end.
are going to be in the back room there, and membership over here.
All right. Thank you. Thanks.